I am thrilled to introduce my dear friend who is a postal stationery and Indian states expert and a very passionate philatelist. He actually reads philately, he eats, and even he dreams about Indian philately. An expert, Sandeep Jaiswal from India and United States of America. Sandeep moved from Kolkata to California in 1985 for higher studies. He currently lives in Rhode Island. Sandeep was involved in European men's and women's fashion business for over 25 years and is now in the smoothie and real estate business. He is also a dealer and an auctioneer of Indian states philately. Sandeep has been collecting Indian states, British India postal stationery, Ceylon postal stationery, Burma postal stationery, and Nepal postal stationery at a serious level since 1985. He has over 20 different philatelic exhibits that have each won a gold medal or higher at a national or international level. His exhibit on Queen Victoria postal stationery has been awarded three FIP large gold medals. Sandeep expertises India and Indian states philatelic items for multiple expertising agencies. He is the current editor of India Post Journal of India Study Circle. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you very much, Pratisad. With that, let me just start to share my screen. Slideshow. Now, can you tell me if you're seeing it full screen or do I need to change the
Yeah,
view?
no, it's full screen.
Okay, it's full screen. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you again for the opportunity. Um, Today we're going to talk about postal stationery, but a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, I think it applies across the board to other areas of exhibiting, not necessarily just postal stationery. Let me clarify one thing right off the bat. Unlike all the other speakers before me in this series, I am not a philatelic judge. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is truly based on my experience as an exhibitor of postal stationery for the last 10 or 12 years. I have been extremely lucky to have had some amazing mentors who are considered the pillars of postal stationery today. Um, so in short, I can put it, I think I learned from the best. And these mentors of mine were really, really helpful to great amount of time to help me understand the do's and don'ts of exhibiting. So that's really what I'm here to share with you. And just to give you a little background on one of my exhibits, it's the Queen Victoria Postal Stationery exhibit of India. You can see the growth in the medal levels over the years, and it's you can see it started off at the FIP level with the Burma medal, and it has now reached large gold medals. One of the things I always tell exhibitors is to make a list of exactly what you have. Because when you're going to shows, when you're traveling to philatelic shows and somebody offers you something, it's imperative that you have a list of what you own, but more importantly, a list of what you're missing. Some collectors would disagree with this point that I'm about to make, but I'm a firm believer that one of the ways to get some really important and rare items is to advertise your want list, what you need. I've done that. I do that all the time. And I know it exposes you to the possibility of being overcharged because the dealer now knows that you are looking for these particular items. But sometimes that's about the only way that these items get offered to you. I highly recommend writing articles on your subject matter for the simple reason that, you know, articles can bring in additional debates and discussions, and it can be an educational process. Um, you don't always have the final word when you write something, but it can become an educational process and you can learn quite a bit. But the other advantage of writing articles is that when you exhibit, you can refer to these articles that you've written, and it gives you a lot more. It lets the judges know that you know your subject matter and you've done enough research. You are somewhat the authority on that particular
Excuse
subject.
me, Sandeep. Excuse me,
Yes.
Sandeep. We can see your second screen. Could you please turn to another screen, view and full screen?
Oh, uh, is that better? Is that
Yes,
better?
it is
Yes,
perfect
better.
now.
Yes, better.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Unlike postal history and other areas, postal stationery, quality of your postal stationery is paramount. So I am always on the lookout for a better quality item to be able to upgrade it. Uh, and it helps if you have a scan of your entire exhibit on a laptop or a tablet or a phone so that you can always, when you see something, you can compare it to what you have. And if it seems like a better in quality, then of course, by all means, go for it. And that's exactly the point I was making, is to carry your exhibit on a tablet or a phone or a laptop. Big question, proper software. I still see people using, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I used to use, believe it or not, I used to use Microsoft Word till one of my mentors, Pat Walker, told me that, Sandeep, you need to understand Publisher and you need to use Publisher for your to design your pages and to write up your exhibit. So she took the time out to teach me on a laptop, and I tell you, it's a huge difference. So I highly encourage you to go out and understand the software that you might want to use instead of a basic Microsoft Word. Makes a huge difference in the layout, in designing and spacing and all those things. Big question, page size, A3 versus A4. I started off doing all my exhibits in A4, which is the American equivalent being 8.5 by 11 inches. I now have pretty much switched all my exhibits to the A3 size, which is 11 by 17, but I cheat. I actually, because I need every possible square inch of real estate, I have come up with my own paper size, which is 11.75, which is the actual height of an A4 page. But I use the maximum width of the American size, which is 17 inches. So I use the maximum size from both systems. It gives me that, believe me, that extra 3/4 inch makes a huge difference. So, and the other thing is, well, before you decide whether you're going to use an A3 or an A4, the most important point to consider is the fact that if you're short of space and you feel like, especially when you're exhibiting postal stationery, if you use an A4, chances are you can only put two postal stationery items on one page without overlapping. On the other hand, if you use A3, you might be able to have three columns of postal stationery items. So you might be able to have 6 items without overlapping. So it makes a huge difference. If you need space, by all means go to A3. On the other hand, if you don't have extra items, or if you're short of items, by all means stick to the A4 size. The importance of a synopsis. Synopsis, like my mentor Pat Walker once told me, and I'm going to quote her exactly. She says, "Sandeep, synopsis is your bragging page. That is a page where you can put information you could never put on the title page of your exhibit. You can put things like how long you've been studying this area, what you've done, how many articles you've written, all these other things that are going to impress the judges. So in short, it's a bragging page. It gives you a lot of space, and synopsis can be a double-sided A4 page. Here's a copy of my synopsis for my Queen Victoria Postal Stationery. I go on in detail. I talk about the treatment, the purpose of this exhibit. I state what is included and what's not included. I talk about pre-production material, unused examples, normal usages. And then I talk about knowledge. Now, this is important because this is, like I said, this is sort of your bragging page. So I write, not under knowledge, I write, I've collected British India Postal Stationery for the past 29 years and consider one of the leading authorities on the subject. Several of my articles on the subject of British India Postal Stationery have been printed in various journals, including the UPSS, volume numbers, so-and-so, pages, so-and-so. I have co-authored the most in-depth book on British India Postal Stationery titled Postal Stationery of British India 1856 to 1947. And I'm currently working on the third edition, which is expected to be out sometime. Well, sadly, that's not true. It has not happened yet. Prati Sadhan, I need to talk some more about it. Most of the images contained in the book are from items in my collection, some being part of this exhibit. At the request of the UPSS, I am currently writing a 300-page catalog on India and Indian States Postal Station, which will be published by the UPSS. So basically, I go on to kind of give the judges an in-depth background on my knowledge and expertise of this area. Another thing that you can talk about in your synopsis, which you can't really spend, rarity of the item. So over here I write, this collection has been formed over a period of 29 years. Many of the items have been acquired by the exhibitor by virtue of exchange, as great items of Indian Victorian postal stationery seldom come on the market. Fact that is evident when one goes through auction catalogs from the top auction firms from the past 20 plus years. Some of my items that are part of this exhibit have been featured in various political journals, including the front cover of India Post, blah, blah, blah. The exhibitor has viewed several great British India Postal Stationery collections, including a couple that have won gold at the FIP level, and can state with authority that none have the rarities that this collection displays, including postal notes, essays of letter cards, etc. Important rare items are displayed against a dark chocolate background. There are several unique items in this collection. Why am I unable to? Oh, there we go. Then I go on to talk about usages. And then I state, I have put a lot of emphasis on unusual and extraordinary uses, as is evident from the following list of used abroad, combination usages, and campaign mails found throughout this collection. So that's my synopsis. Now we come to the title page. Absolutely the most important page of your exhibit. This is where you're telling the viewer and the judges what this exhibit is all about. What is to be expected, what is not to be expected, the sequence of display items, and of course the background on the subject matter. Very important, you must state your purpose and your scope, and you must define your scope. So here I write, the purpose and scope: to display a detailed study of all Victorian postal stationery items, die varieties, paper varieties, printing errors and varieties, watermark varieties, embossing varieties, and shades are all within the scope of this exhibit. Special emphasis has been given to unusual and interesting usages. Official forerunner postcards to demonstrate the development of the official postcard fall within the scope of this exhibit. Victorian postal stationery overprinted for use in Indian convention states or other countries such as British East Africa and Zanzibar are outside the scope of this exhibit, as these are no longer considered British India postal stationery. Victorian postal stationery overprinted a hand stamp for use during the reign of King Edward VII, as well as semi-official hand stamps and overprints are outside the scope of this exhibit. What I have done here is to basically tell the judges exactly what to expect and what not to expect. You don't want to leave it up to the judges to wonder, why doesn't Sandeep have these Chamba or Gwalior or Naba postal station in his exhibit? You want to make it absolutely clear what is included and what is not included. Next is you want to give the viewer an introduction and background to your subject matter. So for the introduction and background, I write, Thomas de la Rue was awarded the contract to supply all postal stationery items for India in 1855. India started issuing postal stationery in 1856 in the form of envelopes followed by letter sheets. The first postcard was issued in 1879. However, official forerunners were experimented with as early as 1872. Postal station quickly became a very popular and important means of communication, primarily because by 1875, there was usually no additional charge for the postal stationery envelope and postcards, as they were sold over the counter at the face value. And in many towns and villages, the post offices was the only place where writing paper was available in the form of postcards, envelopes, and letter sheets. So you're giving the viewer a background of the subject matter. And then I go one step further. I write down basically where British India postal stationery were used from. So besides being used in India proper, British India postal stationery were also issued and used in various British colonies, including Aden, Burma, Iran, Iraq, and various Gulf countries. In French and Portuguese areas of India where the British India Postal Administration operated post offices. In combination with various Indian princely states, also referred to as Indian feudatory states, and then from UPU member countries when a recipient utilized the reply portion of an Indian postcard. From the various overseas military campaigns that the British Indian troops took part in. The next thing I talk about is the exhibit layout so that the viewer can see exactly the order in which the exhibit is going to show the item, display the items. And I use a simple numbering system. All the envelopes, if you notice, start with 1, with the basic, with the different subcategories, envelopes, official envelopes, CEF envelopes, soldiers and seamen envelopes. Then 2 is letter cards, 3A, 3B, 3C are postcards, and so on. What this also does is it allows the judges, if they want to see letter cards, they can find it very quickly rather than having to go through the entire 8 frames of exhibit to find the letter cards. Something I've started doing recently is I've added this little red symbol, this little red circle with the word R inside. It's important to draw your attention to items where you have done your own research and you've come to certain conclusions. So what I do is I have a small note that says personal research, and symbol has been used to indicate personal study research not previously recorded or published, as well as for items discovered by the exhibitor. And if you notice on the right-hand side, it's not something very big, but it's there, and it's bold enough, and it's in red that the judges are not going to necessarily miss it. Here's a page from my King George VI postal stationery exhibit. Again, you can see on the right the letter R in circle. Believe me, that tiny little circle in red is a very powerful tool. I mean, you can use square, you can use whatever symbol you want to use, but it's great to draw attention to your own research and study. There we go. Additional information. In it always helps to have extra information beyond the obvious basic information. If you can incorporate quantities issued and quantity supplied, those are additional information that takes up very little space, but adds to your knowledge and research. Section headers. It's very important to let the audience know where a section starts and where a section ends. And I do that by using a solid chocolate back border, not a border, basically a bar, and that's easily visible from a distance, so people can see where the sections start. Deciding on the first item. Now, this is really important, and unfortunately, not everybody has the luxury of putting a star item or a gem or the best item as the first item of your exhibit, but we should always try to see if we can do that. And if that means you have to rearrange your exhibit, for example, my best item was this proof, but it's a proof for a postal stationery envelope. So for that reason, because I wanted to start with this, I decided to start my exhibit with envelopes, postal stationery envelopes, not postal stationery postcards. So those are decisions you can make. There is no reason why you have to start with envelopes or postcards or letter sheets. It's sort of, again, it's up to you because you're defining the order in which you're displaying things. So I chose to start with envelopes because I have this incredible item. Same holds true for deciding on the last item. Remember, you're telling a story. A story should have a starting point, and most importantly, it has to have an ending point. It has to have a good natural ending to the story. You can't just all of a sudden end your exhibit with an item that doesn't conclude the story. So in my case, I was lucky enough to find this item. It's a mourning card of Queen Victoria Postal Stationery, official postcard. It basically ends the story of Queen Victoria Postal Station because this was produced as a mourning card when Queen Victoria died. Next thing we're going to talk about is the balance on a page. You will often hear other judges talk about railroad. The exhibit looks like railroad. What it means is that they're trying to tell you that everything is like vertical columns. It's very boring. So try to change that if you can. So rather than mounting 4 envelopes, one on top of the other in a vertical line, I space them out I diagonally so that it at least fills up the page a little bit and it doesn't look too monotonous as a vertical line. Another thing that's important is you must have a good balance between the different items you're showing of the same, different, not items, but different categories. For example, I always try to start off when possible. I try to start off with a pre-production item, followed by a normal use issued item, followed by not nice usage, followed by errors and varieties. That's my standard formula for showing items. Very important, duplication and padding. I see this happen all the time, and we're all sometimes guilty of that. We try to balance an exhibit, and in trying to do so, sometimes you end up with space that is really hard to use up because you don't want the next section to start in the middle of a page. So invariably what you end up doing is using something that shouldn't really be used in the sense that it's too similar, it's not important enough, or there's not enough difference. Try to be very, very careful about using something that doesn't belong in the sense that it's duplication. And that's called, in the judging world, it's called padding. Padding is basically you're adding stuff because you have extra space and you're trying to fill up the space. So be careful you don't try to pad your exhibit. There has to be some sort of a consistency between all your pages, and it's very important because you don't want to have, and by consistency I mean using same colors, using similar borders, using similar background, using similar layouts. You can see these are 3 pages from my A4 sheets, but you can see the consistency between the 3 pages. So it's makes it more visually appealing. Using a numbering system that is easy to understand, well, I think that's pretty much straightforward. I mean, I use 1, 2, 3, 4 or A, B, C, D. So one of the things I do is, if you notice the things that are not recorded, I've created a column on the right that says, again, it tells the judges right away, instead of having to write for each item, or this item has been recorded by the exhibitor, I just put it in this tab, in this table. I put down 3 items that are very obvious which 3 were not previously recorded, and that I'm the one who's discovered these 3. Use headers to indicate the start of a new section. Choice of paper, font, and ink color. Very important. I exhibit Victorian postal stationery, for example. As you can imagine, they are not in pristine white mint condition. There's always a certain degree of toning. And so to me, nothing looks dirtier than having that against a stark white page. So what I do is I use what I call an eggshell, just a slightly off shade of white. And I have resorted to using brown, dark chocolate brown instead of black as my base ink color. Matting. It's really important to mat your exhibits. Now, back in the day, people used to use physical matting. It's a tedious work, cutting out paper to the correct size and then matting it, mounting the item on top of that. Nowadays, with technology, with the computer, with Publisher and all these programs, it's so easy to just draw a box. And if you notice, one of the things I do is, if you notice the box, it's filled with a light brownish grayish color. But then I outline it with a very fine line of chocolate brown. What it does is, again, these are all visual tricks. What it does, it gives the illusion, when you look at this item, it makes it nice and square. It evens out all the edges, because what it does is you see the brown fine chocolate outline, and that straightens things out. If you look at my cover, it's not all that straight. If you look at the top left, it's slightly it was open roughly, so all that disappears when you frame it like that. Overlapping is perfectly fine, and as a rule, I will only overlap mint items. I will never overlap used items, because you want to be able to show it in its entirety. And space sometimes means restricted. You don't have a choice but to overlap. Here's another example of overlapping. Again, you'll notice that the unused copies are on the back and the used ones are on top. You're perfectly fine to use photocopies of the opposite side to display or to be able to show what's there. But remember, there must be a difference of at least 25% between the original and the photocopy size, so that you don't by accident confuse the judges into believing that the photocopy is an actual item. So for that reason, Always have it smaller or larger. And I do, if you notice, I write down photocopy of message side over there, just so that it's obvious. Zooming into errors and varieties, again, with all this modern software, it's so easy to do all this. Another perfect example, if you look at this registered envelope, it's almost impossible to see the double print. But when you blow it up and you zoom in on that, you can clearly see the double print. Back to, again, using charts. You can spend a paragraph on each. I could have spent a paragraph trying to describe each of these dies, but illustrations are do an amazing job. I mean, you can literally demonstrate exactly what the differences are without having to have big paragraphs and sentences to describe the differences. Again, same thing with drawings. It would be very difficult for somebody to understand if I wrote a paragraph on the difference between the two papers that were used by Delarue. But when you draw it out, it makes it very obvious. You can clearly state it that it's 20 lines per inch versus 17 lines. So we already talked about tables, but here's again, and I strongly encourage you to use tables. And tables are also good for using up spaces. Sometimes you have unwanted space that you just don't have the right item to put there. So tables can come in really handy. Another thing that you should try to do is to encourage when something is uprated or it's got additional franking. It's always nice to be able to describe and explain the rates and routes. It just goes on to show that you have a good grasp of the entire subject matter. Placement of important items. This is a tricky one, but it's important. It's really important. Face it, we're all getting old. The average age of judges today, if you go to a philatelic show, is 70 plus. And, they don't like to bend down and look at the bottom of the frame. I don't blame them. So it's imperative that you try to if your star items are falling on the very, very bottom of the frame, sadly, judges and viewers might miss it. So try to reshuffle your exhibit, rearrange it in a way so that most of your important items end up at eye level, not on the very bottom of the frame. Easier said than done, I understand, but we can always try. Get extraordinary items certified. Do not leave the judges to wonder if something you have is genuine or not. Perfect example is this cover. The stamp is not tied by a postmark. It's literally just tied by manuscript. So rather than giving judges chance to question the authenticity of this cover, I had it certified. And of course, if you notice, I just put the 3 little words BPA, standing for British Philatelic Association. That means it's been certified by the BPA. Again, talk about framing. So this is a perfect example of how, if I didn't have that red arrow, I don't think anybody would have noticed that nick on the bottom left. Because again, this matting, especially matting with this brown fine line, makes everything look nice and clean and square. Don't let the judges find faults in your items. If there are faults, if you had something repaired, if you've had something cleaned, mention it. Chances are you're not going to lose any points for mentioning faults and repairs, but it's very possible that you may lose points by hiding the fact that something has been repaired or it has faults. I see this happen all the time where exhibitors write, "Oh, this is very rare, extremely rare." It's a very subjective term. So rather than writing rare, try to define the rarity by the number of copies known. For example, in this item, I write believed to be one of 3 copies in private hands. Now, I could have written one of 3 copies in private hands, but that's an open and shut case. I mean, I am not leaving anything open. And God forbid if a 4th copy ever shows up. So when you write, and again, it does not take away from the rarity if you say um, the exhibitor believes that this is one of 4 known copies versus saying one of 4 copies known. I don't think you lose any points, but you are playing it safe to a certain degree. Like I said, refrain from using words such as scarce and rare to define the scarcity of items. Try to quantify. For example, on the bottom postcard, all right, this is the only known example. Again, I clarify to the exhibitor of a cutout of the 9 pies large die used as an adhesive. I don't write. I noticed that I put in the word to the exhibitor. That somewhat protects me just in case another copy is discovered or somebody says, no, I know Mr. X who owns another one. Avoid making claims that can't be proved. Again, perfect example. I am absolutely certain this is unique, but I also realize that there's no reason for me to make that absolute statement. God forbid another copy, somebody knows of another copy. So again, I write down discovery copy and possibly unique. You get the same amount of importance for writing possibly unique versus writing unique. Try to draw logical conclusions instead of sorry, I'm just checking on the time. How we're doing. Time. Okay. Try to draw logical conclusions instead of making unsubstantiated claims. So, perfect example, I write over here, these envelopes were issued in late October 1857, not 15th September 1857. So I'm refuting the published data. And then I go on to explain why I'm disputing this. Again, this all adds to your knowledge and research. And then I write down over here why it could not have been issued as early as 15th September because blah, blah, blah. And then I conclude as such, the date of issue of these envelopes cannot be any earlier than 24th October 1857. Clear, precise conclusions. One of my favorite topics, usage of postal notices. As I mentioned earlier, you will invariably end up with spaces that you don't have items to fill because you don't want your the next section to start in the middle of a page or whatever that may be. So in places like that, spaces like that, I make use of postal notices. They're great items. They're part of the history. They tell the perfect story of when they were issued, what the rates were, why they were issued. And if you notice, I'm showing 2 fantastic items on the bottom, but to fill up the rest of the space, I've got a nice big postal notice over here. Now, don't go on and use 20 postal notices in one exhibit. If you use 2, 3, or 4, I think you'll be perfectly fine. Here's another example of me using a postal notice. Now, what I've done over here is that this is a large postal notice, but I've blocked it off. I've cut out a box just enough to show the pertinent information over here. And it helps me fill up that space, balances the page. Here's another example of me using postal notice. Again, see how I've used this strategically to fill up this page. Use of wrapper bands. Wrapper bands are bands that the postal department used to bundle items and issue them in badges. They're perfectly allowed. per FIP rules to be able to use bands. And again, I use them. They're beautiful, they're decorative, and nice change from the normal items on a page. Here's another example of using, I could have just used the 4 postcards, but it's a nice little thing in the middle. And here I'm showing during the war period, they used any paper that was available. You can see the 3 different shades of the wrapper band I'm showing. Use of formula stationery. So per the current FIP rules, you are allowed to use formula stationery if you're reasonably certain that such formula postal stationery were in fact issued over the counter, postal office counter, with the adhesives affixed to them. Postal orders are perfectly and encouraged, and they're obviously quite rare. So when you find them in an exhibit, it shows the importance of rare items in the exhibit. Postal notes, same thing. Per the current FIP rules, they are absolutely accepted and allowed. Telegraph, so our telegraph forms. So our international reply coupons. Cutouts. You're encouraged to use cutouts in a postal station exhibit. If you're uncertain of a theory, it's best not to state it. Don't open Pandora's box unless you have an absolute logical conclusion and answer for it. Don't ask a question that you can't answer. Remember, you're supposed to be the expert on your subject matter. Do not show lack of knowledge by leaving a question unanswered. So when you start a question, make sure you answer that question. So for example, over here, I write, the exhibit has come to the conclusion that die 6 was the first die employed in the production of the letter sheets. And then I go on to say why I believe that was the first die used. Very important. Try to attend every judge's critique. Ask the judges to go up to your frame and critique it page by page if possible, frame by frame, page by page. I had the good fortune of having Bernie Beston spend a couple of hours at my Queen Victoria exhibit in New York 2016, and it helped me tremendously. He went through page by page to explain what I should change, what I should change. And so try to take the time out and understand. You may not always agree with everything that you're hearing, but keep an open mind, because sometimes we are our own worst critic, and we don't necessarily always see our own faults. So sometimes it takes an outsider to be able to show you something that you completely miss over. Like I said, ask the team leader to critique your exhibit at the frames. Remember, patience is a virtue. You know, it takes time. It takes time to build anything great. Doesn't happen overnight. So have patience. You saw the steps that I have, the how my exhibit went from vermeil to large vermeil to gold to large gold. So I want to take a minute to just thank my supporters and friends and mentors, Mr. Bernard Beston, Markan Dave, Madhukar Jingan, Wayne Manuz, Pratisad Nirgaonkar, Steve Schumann, Viren Sharma, Ajit Singhi, Dan Walk, and Steve Zwillinger. They have all been instrumental in me being the philatelist that I am today, when it comes to postal stationery. Again, that list of mentors and supporters is much longer than this. Here's a book that I highly recommend everybody. If you want to exhibit, or if you're thinking of exhibiting, or if you are an exhibitor, this is an amazing book by Steve Zwillinger. It's got 175 proven points on how to improve your exhibit. I'm very pleased to say that the the Cornfila Group launched a book on my postal stationery exhibit called Edition Dior. It's only the second book ever, and this was volume 65. This is the second book ever on postal stationery. So I feel quite blessed. Here's a little philatelic background on me, but I don't think that's. And here's some of my other exhibits that have. As you can see, I collect stationery as well as Indian states, and I exhibit a lot of the Indian states. And once again, thank you very much for the opportunity. And with that, I turn it over to you guys, Pratisad and Virendra. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandeep. It was a really with illustration with incredible items, and some of those are really unique. And what the way which you have explained, those are very impressive. So I would move towards some of the questions. Those I can read from the chat. There is a first question from Mr. Mohan Chandan. He's asking, how can we assure? Sorry, let me go from the top. Yeah, from the Mohan Chandan, that shall we include color fonts in the text of an exhibit?
I use color font. I mean, like I said, I use chocolate brown and I don't use black. If you notice, in any of my exhibits, I find black to be too stark. So what I do is I use a shade of dark gray and I use brown for all my bold words. I don't encourage you to use a bunch of different colors, but one or two colors is fine.
Okay. The next question is from Usma. Is asking, like, it would be a very interesting to do. Sorry, this is just a comment about arranging such presentation. So of course we will take this forward. And then there is a question from Jenny. Could you comment on the use of the middle mixed size pages? An exhibit, for example, like 8.5 cross 11 pages and few of 11 cross 7. So mixed of these pages.
Absolutely. I use that in several of my exhibits. My exhibit on Indore has a quadruple size page. It's followed by the rest. So it depends on there is no restriction on that said, you should have some sort of consistency. Don't use like 4 different page sizes. Maybe if you're using a combination of A3 and A4, that's fine. If you want to use, for example, for my Indore, I have a quadruple page, so it's 22 by 17 because I have a sheet of Indore hand stamp that is too big to fit in anything smaller than that. So yes, no, you're perfectly fine to use.
Okay. Another question is from, again, Mr. Mohan Chandan is asking, how can we assure that the item is only known example?
Well, there's no substitute for research. If you go back and you've studied your subject matter long enough, you pose the question in your study groups, you've had conversations with other experts, and you've gone through all the study and research that's available. At some point, you can be confident, you can be comfortable enough to say, okay, I think this is the only known copy. But remember, like somebody was saying yesterday, when it comes to a used item of postal history or used postal stationery, almost every used item is unique. It's like saying, well, this is the only known copy of the Queen Victoria Guarana postcard used from Bareilly to Ludhiana on March 15th, 1895 at 7 a.m. So be careful what you're trying to say when you say something is unique. On the other hand, unless I'm absolutely dead certain, now there's some archival material that, or hand-painted essay, for example, which only one word is produced, I try to refrain from using the word unique. I'll say possibly unique or believed to be unique. So that's how I go about using the word unique.
Okay, great. Next question is from Mr. Pratik. He's asking which software tools other than the Word can be used to improve the presentation?
Okay, so I'll tell you this. I'm a PC user. I don't use Mac, so I don't know Pages. I've always used Word. And then when Pat Walker taught me Publisher, she literally spent an hour, and I learned Publisher in 1 hour. Publisher is really derived from Word. So if you know Word, if you have a good understanding of Word, it's very easy to learn Publisher. And I tell you, Publisher is a very powerful software. I used to use InDesign, but it takes too much time. That's of course one of the best softwares available for publishing. But I love Microsoft Publisher. It's very easy to understand, very easy to use. So that's my choice of software for designing pages.
Okay. With this, we have covered all these questions of this category. So over to you, Pratisha.
Thank you, Sandeep, for the presentation. It was very wonderful and very informative. So thank you, Sandeep, for the insightful presentation. And it's a token of appreciation from Planetary Congress of India. Thank you very much for your presence. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.